Across Vermont, as across the nation, one big topic of conversation has been the reopening of schools, how to do it safely, and how to lighten the load on parents who have to work, whether from home or not. And there have been many unexpected surprises and outcomes that have come with the pandemic, some of them, in an odd way, beneficial, most of them probably not. One of the immediate term benefits for many communities in Vermont, especially in the southern tier of the state, has been an increase in the number of people who can work remotely moving to the state, driven in part by a perception that Vermont has done a good job controlling the spread of the virus and that rural country living and lifestyles have a lot to offer. The real estate market is sizzling, although that may turn out to be a short-term phenomenon. But for now, the arrival of new residents is also bringing an influx of new students to area schools. Burnburton Academy in Manchester and the Winhall School District, a so-called non-operating district because it doesn't run a school of its own and instead pays tuition to schools where the parents send their children, have both been affected by this enrollment spike. And so to learn more about how the situation was impacting them, we talked with Headmaster Mark Tashin of Burnburton Academy and Winhall School Board Chairwoman Jennifer
In a
Samuelson.
typical year, Burnburton will have 50 to 75 new students. That's 50 to 75 students who come to Burnburton who are not showing up in the 8th grade in any of our sending schools. So a chunk of them will come into 9th grade, and then there'll be another group coming into 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. So that's a normal year. It floats in that range, which I think people would find surprisingly high. But that's, we seem to be a magnet for people in a good way. Mm-hmm. This year, there's unquestionably a lot of real estate activity, and that's coming from a response to the global pandemic. And people who have some connection to Vermont finding a way to relocate here. I think it's facilitated also by the fact that a lot of people are working remotely. So if you're going to work remotely, you may as well work remotely from Vermont, where we have the lowest COVID rate in the nation. And Bennington County has the lowest COVID rate in Vermont. So this starts to look like a really attractive place to just live and continue with your job in a remote fashion and have the opportunity to send your kids to schools in a much safer environment than elsewhere. So that clearly is going on. It's a long way of saying we're seeing a bump. I don't know how big that bump is going to be just yet. But if a normal year we could have 50 to 75, we may have 75 to 100 people showing up this year. So, but very clearly, we've been getting a lot of people coming who are saying, we want to come here. Burnburton is opening for in-person instruction. My home district is going remote. Can we come here? How do I establish residency? How does this all work? So I haven't quantified it, but there's a substantial number of people carrying that same story.
A couple of years ago, Winhall saw an unanticipated increase in the number of students living in the district, which put upward pressure on their school budget. They are now seeing another enrollment spike. Jennifer Samuelson fills us in.
When we passed the budget in March, we set our budget based on 202 students. That 202 included 15 ghost students. So we knew of, we were expecting 187 that we knew about, and then we added in the additional 15, arrived at the number of 202. And yeah, your recollection is correct. I believe the number that we had last week at the meeting was right around 240. I mean, it'd be good to follow up with the families. I don't want to make assumptions, but I think if you look at the data, and I, have spoken with some of the schools, and they have provided the school board with information, many of the families that are moving to the area do appear to be coming from literally across the country. So I think it's a good guess that it's probably pandemic related, and there have been a couple of articles in Vermont Digger that would seem to support that as well. I think the fact that we're an attractive town, I think, is something to be proud of. I think, for years we have been attracting new families, many times from out of state to Win Hall. And I think as we look at the state with its declining population and sort of increasing average age, Win Hall is bucking that trend, and I think that's fabulous. But you are correct, it does pose issues as far as the budget goes, because these are clearly students that were not anticipated when we passed our budget in March. But I think, to the extent that these are people who are moving here in response to the pandemic, my hope is that that would be recognized, within the legislature, and that there would be some relief that would be available to us, because although families, I think, are moving to Vermont all over the state, I think Win Hall is getting a disproportionate number of those families just because of how we are geographically located.
The enrollment spike is but one of the outcomes of the pandemic. Another is college admissions, where the economic impact of the virus has thrown many students' plans, and their parents, for financing college into question. VSAC, the Vermont Student Assistant Corporation, recently did a study on how COVID-19 was affecting their college plans. VSAC is also tapping into a special fund of more than $5 million to help students who might need additional financial assistance. Here to tell us about both the survey and the COVID Fund is Marilyn Cargill, their Vice President of Financial Aid Services, Marketing and Research.
There were two things we were looking at. One was their enrollment plan, and the second one was how financially these families have been impacted by COVID. And we were interested in that because we run the state grant program, and we really wanted to know whether there were going to be significant changes that would either impact the state grant program, or could we modify the state grant program in some ways to mitigate the problems that might exist. So that's why we started the survey in the first place. And so the two big findings to me, the first one was that students really do intend to go back to school in Vermont this fall. So almost 90% of first-time students, like 90.5% of first-time students, and slightly over 85% of returning students said, we are going to be at school in the fall. That is a really high number in the middle of a pandemic. So that was interesting to us, and slightly higher than what we might have thought we were going to see. And those numbers start to change a little bit when you modify your question a little. So if you went from, are you planning to go back to school, to, will you return to school if most of your classes are online? Then the question and answer changed a little bit. And instead of 90% saying they were going back, closer to 70% said they'd return, even if their classes were majority online. So we know that the way that school is going to be delivered will matter to students, and we know that our students really want to return. The second question that we asked, though, that was really important, was we asked these families whether or not they had been personally impacted by COVID from a financial perspective. So was their financial security hurt? We found that, and we were asking some, like, did you lose your job? Were your hours cut? Did your parents lose their job? Were their hours cut? Was there medical expenses that you incurred? So we had a series of questions that we asked, trying to figure out financial impact. 65% of the people who responded to the survey had been personally impacted by COVID-19 and their financial security. That is a really high number. That is a really high number. And that in turn launched some changes that the state has put in place to try to address that problem. Back in June, I believe, mid-June, late June, is they gave VSAC $5.1 million out of the COVID relief funds to address this problem. And what we're able to do is say to a family, If your income went down because of COVID-19, appeal to us. Let us know that, because I don't know what you know about financial aid, but it's a really interesting and very complex system. But you apply for financial aid using 2-year-old income. So for the 21 school year, you're using your 2018 tax information. Well, 2018 was a whole different world than 2020. So what we said to families were, if you were impacted, we want you to use your 2020 income. And that has allowed a lot of families who have seen those direct impacts to be able to appeal and to be able to get additional state grant money to help offset those lost family wages. So we've been able to do that for a number of families. The other problem that students raised really early and schools raised was all of our Vermont schools are thinking about having some portion of their school year be remote, right? So it's not going to be everyone goes to school, you sit in a classroom and the professor's at the front. Like, we all know that there may be some of that, but there's going to be a lot of learning out of dorm rooms. There's going to be a lot of learning out of your home. And so that means every Vermonter who's in school needs a laptop or an iPad or some way to connect to those online classes. They need high-speed internet, or at least high enough speed so that they can get on the Zoom meetings to take part in classwork, be able to do the online exams. And so that was another thing that the state looked at, and there's been money appropriated that VSAC is using to help families that are in that situation as well. And the Vermont colleges across the state are nominating students that they believe will face that difficulty this fall. The takeaway that I really would like families to hear is one, that students in Vermont really are interested in being in college this fall, whether they're at home and studying remotely or they're on campus. Students have really indicated their desire to be there. And two, there are absolutely funds in a weird kind of way. There is more money right now to help families pay for college than there has ever been. And if you are looking at college, you definitely should be applying for financial aid. And if you have a lower income in 2020 than you did in 2018, you should be appealing to VSAC in your school. And if they walk away with those pieces of information, then that would be great.
So the starting point might be then your website there at vsac.org.
Yes, that's a fabulous place to start. If they are looking to say, I'd like to appeal, how do I do that? They can just give us a phone call. We have a toll-free number that you can call anywhere in the state or anywhere in the country for that matter. It's 1-800-882-4166. And very welcome to call us, and we will help them understand whether or not their situation would qualify for appealing.
The coming weeks are going to be an interesting time on the education front as schools navigate their way through this phase of the pandemic. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.